COVID-19. It's the amplifier. It's accelerating things. And it's accelerating things in a great way because hard questions are being asked and we're looking at our institutions. I mean, democracy, every generation except for mine fought for it. Mm-hmm. And some of them died for it. And I'm fighting for it. I'm fighting for it in my own way as a compassionate white male. And yes. I'm trying to recognize my privilege, and I'm trying to deal with my privilege in as best I know how. And that's through philanthropy, that's through volunteerism, that's through advocacy.
Hi, I'm Clay Boykin, and I am in search of the new compassionate male. Today, my producer, Dennis Tardan, and I had the opportunity to visit with Gard Jameson. Gard received his PhD from Pacifica Graduate Institute in 2005 and his BA from Stanford University in Religious Studies. He teaches Asian philosophy at the University of Nevada in Las Vegas, and he's the author of 5 books, the most recent being The Peace Pilgrim Pictures. Gard and his wife co-founded Volunteers in Medicine of Southern Nevada. He serves as the vice chair of the Charter for Compassion, and he's co-founder of the Children's Advocacy Alliance. He's co-founder of the Southern Nevada Interfaith Council and Compassionate Las Vegas. He's also the coordinator of Contemplative Outreach, founded by Thomas Keating. Gard is a fascinating person worth pausing for. Here's that conversation.
Hello world, it's me, Dennis, and we are in search of the new compassionate male. I'm the producer of this podcast, and I'm here with the host and founder, Clay Boykin. Hi, Clay.
Hi, Dennis.
Would you introduce our guest today?
Certainly, it's a pleasure. Gard Jameson. First, you lead Compassionate Las Vegas, and you're associated very closely with the Charter for Compassion. As well, you have done a number of huge things in the terms in the area of volunteerism, and I want to hear all about that today.
Yes. We do, because we're trying to define the word compassion. How does compassion arise within each of us? How does this, if the patriarchy is crumbling, which it appears to be around the world, something, nature abhors a vacuum, something must arise. And what Clay has started and has been doing over this process is being in search of this archetype, the new compassionate male. And if you could talk a little bit about your journey into this and how compassion is being defined and showing up in your life and among your students and among the people that you're touching, that please explore that any way you'd like.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Well, as for all of us, it is a journey. And as one arrives at the age of 67, which I am now, one begins to see how the threads come together and how the orchestration has been sort of led all the way along. So my story actually begins back in the 60s when my father was stopped for a traffic ticket in Las Vegas for going 25 miles an hour down the strip. Now you might ask, so that doesn't sound very interesting, but he was in reverse. It was 2 a.m. He was in his bathrobe. He was drunk, and the woman in the back was not my mother. And so I'm here in Southern Nevada doing redemption work for my father. And part of that was when I was in college, I called him one day and I said, Dad, there's a great program that suggested if I sent $10 in a month, I could help a kid in Africa. And he said, absolutely not. And I said to myself, Scrooge. But then he said, what I want you to do is join Big Brothers and Big Sisters. And so I was attending Stanford University at the time, and I joined Big Brothers, Big Sisters, and I had a young man who had cerebral palsy. He couldn't move anything. And in fact, before we met, he had attempted suicide. And young Kurt, I introduced to the sporting teams at Stanford. And son of a gun, if he didn't get the 50-yard line tickets at the stadium, and if he didn't get center court during the basketball games. But it was really a revelation for me because it helped me to see that this isn't just about writing checks. This is about showing up and being present to a quality of suffering in the world. And through no fault of his own, Kurt had cerebral palsy. But his life turned around, and the highlight of my college career, Dennis, and was when, as a senior in my spring semester, the Burlingame police had been called because there was an unruly band coming down Burlingame Avenue playing Happy Birthday, Kurt. And it was the Stanford Marching Band. And, you know, what you experience is, as it suggests in the scripture, that there's a quality of joy that emerges as a result of doing this kind of work. And so I was hooked there in college that this was really how I wanted my life to be, and to really create a trajectory around that. So fast forward, I was lucky enough to marry my childhood sweetheart. I met her when I was 15, she was 14. And we got married in 1982. We moved out to Southern Nevada. And again, it was a very kind of small place at that time, about 300,000. Compared to a lot of cities, that's pretty small. And we got started and we raised a family. And then after that moment, we realized we needed to do something significant to assist in our community. So my wife, as a child, had been raised by a mother who was alcoholic, a father who had been thrown in jail, and she got herself through medical school, became an obstetrician gynecologist. And there was a family doctor who at an early age said, I want to take care of you, to her mother and all the kids, and you don't need to worry about paying me. So Florence at that moment said, pay it forward. And so in 2008, we started what's called Volunteers in Medicine in Southern Nevada. And we are the only free and charitable clinic here in Southern Nevada that provides health care, dental care, mental care, as well as spiritual care. We have 2 meditation rooms in our clinic, believing that all 3 dimensions of ourselves are absolutely integral to being a full person. And last year we saw 8,000 people. We gave over $3 million in free meds and over $1 million in free diagnostics to people who otherwise would just die. And what we observed was that our coroner was toe tagging these individuals as natural deaths at the age of 35, 40, 45. And what we realized was these are not natural deaths. These deaths did not need to occur. And so it's been a tremendous blessing. And I've been involved in other activities here. I helped start the Community Foundation here in 1988. In 1998, we started the Children's Advocacy Alliance, which is the statewide advocacy group for children, recognizing that the state of our state will never be better than the state of our children. And so that led to, in 2010, the development of something called the Fellowship, where we brought together nonprofit leaders from across the community to connect. Because what we were told in a survey that we had done was that these people were living in silos. They were not connected, and they were not engaging one another in their projects, in their work. And so we brought them together. We've been doing that ever since. We have about 250 of these fellows who are part of the fellowship now. And out of that was born Compassionate Las Vegas. And our dear mayor, Mayor Goodman, immediately when I introduced the idea said, absolutely, we will become Compassionate Las Vegas. So we honor compassionate people in the community every year with Compassion Awards. And we have a podcast like yourself, where we are highlighting compassionate individuals, compassionate males and females. And I have the privilege, I was a CPA for 25 years, so I tell people I was doing a lot with my left brain, and my right brain was suffering. And so I went back, got a PhD, and now teach Asian philosophy. So Lao Tzu, to answer your question, long story in answer to your question, Dennis. Lao Tzu says in the Tao Te Ching, can you play the part of the female? And what we observe is that so many of our male heroes, the John Waynes, the Ronald Reagans, are really machismo. Huh? and have really not really incorporated the qualities of sensitivity and androgyny that are required to be a whole person. So part of my journey has been to do that. And as a result, my son is now my daughter. She's transgender. So we have gender fluidity in our family, and I'm proud of her and the
Congratulations.
adventure that she has been through. And my other daughter is an artist in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and doing incredible work. So it's been an extraordinary experience all the way along.
Mm.
You know, Gard, I am, uh, as your elder brother, I'm 72. You're more of a peer with Clay. But we've watched this time, this extraordinary arc of history to where here we are in 2020 in August of 2020, not really knowing how we're going to come out of this particular time with the COVID pandemic, with how we in the United States have responded to it. How do you see this disruption as an opportunity to be able to show up more compassionately?
Well, in 2 days will be August 6th. And I wrote an editorial for our local paper, which is going to be published. I'll send it to you. It's called From Hiroshima to COVID-19.
Mm.
And the recognition is that we are in the middle of a huge transition. And that transition began at the end of World War II with the Holocaust and with the atomic bomb and with the horrors of that war and the preceding war, World War I. But out of that came the ecological movement, out of that came feminism, out of that came civil rights, out of that came so many blessings where we began to acknowledge. And what I recognize with COVID-19 is that our inequities and disparities are being laid bare by this virus. We are seeing how we are treating the George Floyds of the world. We are seeing how we are treating people with brown skin. We are seeing how we are treating humanity. And we are recognizing, and we're having to do a little critical self-examination through this process, but we are recognizing that we have failed in so many ways. And that as a nation, our pride really has created this fall. But as my teacher, Thomas Keating, likes to say, a fall is a wonderful thing. It's a great opportunity to get up. My daughter, Julia, when she was learning to skate, fell and she scraped her knee, and we ran over to see her. And she said, "It's okay, Mom, Dad. It's just part of the game."
Mm.
So we have fallen, and we have fallen far. And COVID-19 has created this. George Floyd and so much of what's happening, John Lewis has brought this to our attention. So much of what's happening in our society is raising, if you will, the standard by which we begin to behave with one another. So two pieces are required. One is a kind of restructuring in how we do institutions. We have, for too long, allowed kings and queens to dominate our institutional culture. And two is the recognition that there is a higher power. And that higher power is a source of compassion, a source of wisdom. And if we are interested in those qualities, then we better tap in. We better plug in to those, to that higher power, however you name it. And I'm the chair of the Interfaith Council here in Southern Nevada. So we do a lot of work in dialogue. We have a thing called Camp Anytown, where we take kids, we take 70 kids from the schools who are rough kids, and we teach them about prejudice, bias, and bigotry. And Clay, Dennis, it is a miracle. When they walk out after 4 days of this camp, they are transformed individuals. We've been doing it for over 30 years. And many of these individuals are now in our state assembly. One was the former fire chief. Many are doing great things in our community to really transform our community. And why? Because they've been freed. It's the story of Exodus. They've been freed from their narcissism. They've been freed from their self-referencing. And they recognize there is a larger force at work. And so COVID has really done us a great blessing. How we've managed it, has been absolutely abysmal. But it's done us a great blessing in revealing all of the disparity and inequity in our culture, and how we are to reconstruct requires just what you two are doing, which is re-examining who we are as individuals and what we bring to the table. And it's not just machismo. That's part of it, but that's not all of it. We need to bring a quality of compassion and wisdom, which requires the feminine dimension of our own selves.
Absolutely. So many people, are in fear.
Yeah.
If fight or flight, then that's all they can think about right now. How do we speak to that?
Well, when I teach at the university, I'm a little, my students at the first week, Clay and Dennis, think I'm a little eccentric because I bring in fossils and I go through 4.5 billion years of Earth history. And then I tell them this is really going to be a game show. So whatever the class is, this is a game show. And door number 1 is fear, anxiety, and anger. And door number 2 is love, joy, and peace. And then I say, here's your first pop quiz. How many of you prefer to stay in door number 1? Fear, anxiety, and anger. Don't answer. Don't raise your hand. Please do not raise your. But do see me after class, because you and I need to talk. And then I tell them what you don't know. And the great swindle has been, you've been told that door number 1 is the human condition, is your birthright, is who you are. But that's the swindle. Your birthright, the deposit in the bank, is door number 2, love, joy, and peace. And what I'm going to do during the course of this semester is give you some practical techniques of how you can begin to migrate from door number 1 to door number 2 and claim that birthright. So that's an easy, and the kids get it right away. And I would say about halfway through the class, I see the lights starting to go on inside their eyes. And it's such a joy for me as a teacher.
What a feeling that must be, Gard. To describe to see the light go on in someone else's eyes when they recognize that the power within them is greater than what they felt before is astonishing.
It is astonishing. I tell them the story of Mullah Nasruddin, who was one day observed out in the front lawn, going through the lawn, which had not been cut in a long time because Mullah was a little lazy. And neighbor leaned out the window, realizing that Mullah was a little crazy in the head, said, "What are you doing now, Mullah?" And he said, "Well, I'm looking for the key to my house." The neighbor said, "Oh, really? So where do you think you left it?" He said, "Oh, that's easy. I left it in the house." The neighbor said, "What in the heck are you doing out in the front lawn when you know you left it in the house? Let's figure out how to." He said, "But there's so much more light out here." We look for our answers in the wrong direction, right? And we look outside of ourselves. And this was one of the 2 stories I tell my students at the beginning of the class. The answers are within. That repository of love and joy and peace are within each of us. We just need to learn how to claim it. And then the other thing I tell them is the story of the blind man and the elephant, which I know you both know. And the recognition, I say, the story of philosophy is basically a story of blind people who, in philosophy, I say, to the extent that you affirm your own personal experience, you're generally correct. But to the extent that
Yeah, exactly. You want to know what you believe. Yeah.
To the extent that Clay denies your experience, Dennis, or you deny Clay's experience, you're generally wrong. And that's the whole story of philosophy. You've got Freud and Marx and Nietzsche and all these people who are saying, I'm right, listen to me. And no, but do they have a piece of the elephant? Absolutely. Marx had a very keen insight on social injustice. Nietzsche had a very keen insight on the limitations of institutionalized religion. Freud had a very keen insight, obviously, on the inner dimension of the unconscious. So all of these things bear witness, but really our life story is how we bring all these threads together to create a tapestry of meaning in our own life. And so the first book I have them read is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And then I have them write a 2-3 page paper on their own significant experience of meaning in their own life, bringing in the term the numinous, which is the experience of the sacred. Where have you found the sacred in your life, and how has that changed your life, your trajectory? So yeah, it's a privilege to teach. It's a privilege
Wow.
to teach, and it's a privilege to be part of this journey of compassion.
Hmm.
Well, Gard, if I may and jump in here on one
Sure.
thing, Clay, uh, I have never seen a teacher who is worth my time who does not walk the journey in front of me. Your journey of compassion, those nights when you have gone, how am I going to grow? Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I'd like to learn more about how you are doing it and how you are showing up when it's hard for
It's,
you to show up.
as you know, there's a lot of those moments, the dark night of the soul. So the big one for me was 1972. I was putting in fire alarm systems in Southern California, and I had just gotten word that a friend of mine, Lee Benjamin, had been on patrol in Vietnam. And as he was walking down the path, 3 kids with hand grenades in both hands approached his battalion. At the end, all of his battalion lay dead. The 3 kids lay in their blood dead, and Lee had had his leg blown off. He was the only survivor. So it was at that moment, Dennis, Clay, that I basically, my aunt and uncle had gone to the beach. I turned off the lights, and I was just sitting there on the bed, and I was weeping, tears of great sadness. And out of my heart came this question: if there's anybody here, I need to know, and I need to know now, because I'm not sure I can continue to pay the rent. And in that moment, sure as we're watching one another here and talking to one another, in that moment, I was flooded with an overwhelming experience of love, unconditional love. And that experience has sort of been my milestone. And in fact, I got thrown out of my local church. I was a volunteer pastor for a few years, filling in. And I got thrown out for suggesting the audacious idea that God's love is unconditional. And
Mm.
the congregation loved me. I mean, 75% said keep him.
Yep.
Evangelical said no. This guy is not following the rules.
Yeah. It is. I'd like to tell Clay. Did you have a story like that?
What I wanted to do, I wanted to ask, because over this past couple of years, and well, longer than that, what I'm coming to see is that we know the truth.
Mm-hmm.
We absolutely know the truth, and that, at least for the guys, this whole patriarchal system is pushed down, pushed down, pushed down. But given a safe environment, a place of non-judgment, and the opportunity to open up,
Mm-hmm.
it comes out. And to me, it comes out in the form of love in action, which to me is compassion.
Right.
And I've seen this across the United States. I've seen it in Kenya, young men over there.
Mm-hmm.
It's there. Given the opportunity, we know, and we can then integrate in head and heart and then show up in the world. And
Well, as you both know, the neuroscience that has been done in the last 10, 20 years has been phenomenal. So most people are living from their reptilian brains, right? So most of our Congress people, many of them, are living from that reptilian brain of fight or flight. And, until we begin to transfer the seed of identity from that reptilian brainstem to our neocortex, which is truly being human, and to those centers of compassion, which they've discovered in monks who have meditated, and they see places firing in the brain that they've never seen before.
mm-hmm.
There's so much that's still to be learned, but we recognize that, as you say, Clay, inside of ourselves, inside of not only the brain, but also the heart, which we now know is also a thinking brain. It has neurons.
Exactly.
Vagus nerve. It has magnetic resonance 5 times the size of the brain itself. And so what we're opening to is that realization, just as you say, that if I just give it an inch, it'll take a mile. But unfortunately, those primitive reactions have so dominated, and again, I take in 4.5 billion years of fossils and rocks and so on and so forth. And I tell them it's going to take a little bit
Mm-hmm.
to remove that center of identity from that reptilian brain.
Well, it happened to me. I took a bad fall when I was in Kenya. And as I was hitting the ground, two guys were reaching down spontaneously. Their natural reaction was to grab and pick me up. My natural reaction was, this is going to hurt, and I don't want them to feel bad. To me, that's compassion, you know.
That's why I think a contemplative practice is really required. You know, Wayne Teasdale, who is a friend, suggests, right, that we really need to incorporate a contemplative practice into our lives, just like we
Absolutely.
eat, just like we sleep. We need a contemplative practice which plugs us in, right? How long can we go with this device without plugging it in? How long can we go as human beings without being plugged in? Not very long.
As long as I am looking and searching for whatever it is outside of myself to fill a hole that is inside, then I'm going to chase it forever. It's going to be like that. I remember watching a dog track and chasing that mechanical rabbit.
Yeah.
Even if I caught it, what would it? So you were talking about one of the videos that I said the video that I saw of you, Gard, is that you were talking about secularism.
Yeah.
And how that that there has been a perniciousness in the quest of the scientific to minimize. Does making that balance to redefining this and really understanding the spiritual in a different way, could that make a difference in what we're doing here today?
Oh yeah. I mean, that's why interfaith is so important, and Wayne called it interspiritual. When we recognize that values are the leading edge, that compassion and wisdom are the leading edge, and not the Vatican or Salt Lake City or any institution, then we're on to something. And then the question becomes, as Dennis said earlier, how do we dive into that pool of values? How do we actually experience it? And it's just what my father did to me. He said, join Big Brothers, Big Sisters. Put yourself out there in a comfortable way. And what we say in the Charter for Compassion is, a compassionate city is an uncomfortable city, right? And so one of the first things we did was to identify, where are we uncomfortable? And the number one was homelessness. So we're about to take a trip to your wonderful city, Austin, and to take a look at the initiative that they've got there around homelessness, which is an incredible initiative, where they're not just packed away in tents, but they're actually given dignity. They're given opportunities to be responsible, be part of a community. And that's really, as I tell my students, there are three principles that govern the entire universe. My teacher, Thomas Berry, in the Universe Story, suggests these three principles, which is that there's a unity, that we are all connected. Whether we acknowledge it or not, we are all connected. And out of that unity emerges this glorious diversity. My wife is a gardener, and if you saw our backyard, you would see this, even in 107 degrees, right? Flowers everywhere. It's vincas in the summer and it's daisies in the winter. But the diversity is what makes existence beautiful. And it's underneath that diversity, the unity, which makes it sacred. And then the third principle is that everything is intended to become just what it was intended to become. So an acorn is destined to be an oak tree. The problem with the human species, right, is that we have been given this incredible power called self-consciousness. We have been given this incredible power called self-direction, where we have choices to make. And because of the evolutionary biological brain, we have been making choices out of fear rather than out of compassion. And so until we shift that seed of identity, we're going to continue to do that. And you can get all the legislation in the world. You can get all the different congressmen and senators and presidents you want. But until we change consciousness, which is really what I think COVID is helping us to do, there won't be much progress. So a friend of mine who is the chief rabbi of Holland, 1944, he was thrown from a train into a field in France. And you think, wow, that sounds horrible. Well, the train was on its way to Auschwitz. And he was raised by a farmer there in France. And he is an incredible person, Rabbi Sodentorp. He said that he and the Pope and several other interfaith leaders in the fall, this fall, we'll be coming out and declaring this the holy decade. And he said, not to say that not all time is sacred, all time is sacred, but this next 10 years is going to require more transformation of consciousness and of institutions and of societies, communities, than has happened in all of the previous recorded human history. And we know that. We look at the climate,
Yes.
we know that. And so what you're doing, I just want to say thank you, because you are spreading the message, and it needs to be spread.
Thank you.
I thank you, Gard. That's so gracious, because we can look out and go, that when you talk about in the Bible, they talk about the story with Jesus. They say, well, there'll always be poor. It's like it can be overwhelming to try to look at what we can do, but I know that I have to look at what is mine to do. I love what you said about uncomfortable. Getting into that place of discomfort is the feature and not the bug.
Mm-hmm.
That is the medicine.
Yeah.
So Carl Jung said, you never get to the self, you never get to the gold unless you go through the shadow. So we've got to find that place of discomfort. What is it inside of the white? By the way, the other day I got two questions. What's your favorite TV show and what's your pet peeve? And I said, right now at 67, my favorite TV show is Michael Douglas in the Kaminsky Method, where he and Alan Arkin sit around talking about their prostates. Right? I just laugh so hard. It's so funny. I said, and my pet peeve, coincidentally, is old white men.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And I'm so over old white men, being an old white man, and I'm sitting there, and it's just like, oh my goodness, on how we, I'm interested in this idea, Gard and Clay, about where are we evolutionarily? I mean, if 3.5 million years is not a long time for a species to be around, we're kind of in our really early stages, even though we've developed some technology that ends up to be disruptive to the entire system and what we're doing. But yet, if we can have this decade, there is a possibility for us to evolve faster than would be there. It might be baked into that evolutionarily. Can you pick something in there and help us?
Yeah, well, I mean, what's your original question, COVID-19? It's the amplifier. It's accelerating things. And it's accelerating things in a great way, because hard questions are being asked, and we're looking at our institutions. I mean, democracy, every generation except for mine fought for it.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them died for it. And I had 5 Guards and I had 5 Jamesons at Gettysburg who fought for it. And I'm fighting for it. I'm fighting for it in my own way as a compassionate white male. And
Yes.
I'm trying to recognize my privilege, and I'm trying to deal with my privilege in as best I know how. And that's through philanthropy, that's through volunteerism, that's through advocacy, especially for the children. The children that are coming into this world now, I feel for them, but I also recognize this is a world of opportunity and a world of hope, and that what dominates culture is spirit. Emerson said this. And if we just allow, as you said, Clay, our hearts and our minds to open up, the answers are all there. I was in Melbourne in 2011, for the Parliament of the World Religions. We had on stage all of the indigenous leaders from across the globe. And they were all holding hands. And the local indigenous lady came forward. She said, "We have the answer when you're ready to listen."
Well, that's where one of the things I was thinking about when we're talking about like this, the advances in science, and when 40 years ago, when somebody got an idea and they needed to have it peer reviewed, it had to go to an article, and it had to go up to a committee, and they had to decide it. Then it had to be printed, and then it had to be sent out all over the world before somebody in another part of the world could get that. Today, you can upload to a board and have it peer reviewed by someone that night. So the speed of where we're able to do what we're able to touch, because these children, when you look into the eyes and you see that light go on, Gard, when Clay, I was looking at Clay the other day. He has this wonderful, he does this wonderful, you do this wonderful wire work. And he created these wires, these metallic wires, to go into a fishing pond.
Mm-hmm.
Tell that story, Clay.
We have two neighbor children, 2 and 3 years old, and they can come over and I can be safe distance back. And I made little fishes out of wire, and I made, magnet on a fishing pole, and they were coming over and catching fish and having a wonderful time. Well, I learned that they're studying their ABCs. So a couple of days ago, I sat there and made A, B, C, each one individual, dropped them into the pond and sent a message over. And I said, the fish are swimming in alphabet soup. And so now the kids are coming over, there's an A, there's a C.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Isn't that Gard? And see, this to me is the emblematic of, we do what's in front of us.
Yeah.
What is right in front of us, and where that just touches me so much, Clay, as to doing what is ours to do. So when you look at yourself right now and what is yours to do, Gard, tell us some of the things that you're curious about or interested in or learning about yourself right now.
Well, every morning I ask for a new revelation of love, right? And I'm very fond of Psalm 100, which says, open your hearts with thanksgiving and enter the courts with praise. Right? Open that gate with thanksgiving and enter the courts with praise. So to me, it's how we set for the day. And I don't know what each day is going to bring, but I do exactly what you say, Dennis. Today, I took my Down syndrome niece over to Opportunity Village, which just opened up, and she was jumping and clapping and so excited, and that's what today brought. It was such a joy to be with little Nicole, who's 31 years old and has all the autism and Asperger's and schizophrenia and all these different diseases, has stuff that just is not fair, right?
Yeah.
And so how we create a quality of joy in the lives of those who have been dealt a bad hand, that's the question. So on Monday, yesterday, I was delivering food to seniors who were shut in and at risk, right? And to see the smiles on their face, I tell the people, we started this program, and I tell my co-founders, I say, I think I'm getting more out of this than they are. They're getting a meal and they're so grateful, but I'm blissful, right?
Mm-hmm. Gard, that's one thing one of the teachers that helped me to understand is that there is no such thing as a one-way blessing.
Yeah.
If I am not receiving as much as I am giving, then there's something wrong with my receptor.
Yeah.
Clean my damn glass from the inside, because I am missing out on something.
Yeah. Well, that's the story. I was at work one day, Dennis, Clay, had a fellow, when I was a CPA, he opened up his bag and he said, peanut butter, huh? I said, well, John, why don't you ask your wife to make you something different? John looked at me with a kind of a scowl. He said, I make these sandwiches. You leave my wife out of this. So what kind of attitude? And that's where, again, I go back to, I'm writing a book now on the Beatitudes Reimagined, and I've sort of reset them. I sort of did a Scrabble. And I said, if you get the first 4 attitudes or the first 4 buttons on the shirt, it goes down pretty well. And the first button is humility. And the second button is curiosity and a willingness to ask for a new revelation of love every day, every moment. And the third button is meekness, which is persevering with a quality of kindness and patience. And that's where the feminine comes in. And to persevere and to move through the tough stuff that's happening, which happens to all of us. with the quality of kindness and patience, which, as we know from Paul, is the equivalent of love. And then the fourth one is sincerity, which is just to be transparent, to be present, to be authentic, and as you can in every moment. If you get those first four attitudes, then the last four go down pretty well. And the last four are, blessed are those who mourn. And we have plenty to mourn about. And if my heart is not breaking every day, then I've got a problem. I need to allow my heart to break every day, and it does, as I watch what's going on all around me. And that breaking of my heart opens it, right? You cannot have an open heart unless it's broken. So I always ask my students, how many of you have had a broken heart? And invariably, most of them put their hands up, and I say, congratulations. And I said, how'd the Advil work? And they, oh, no, it doesn't work. Right? And it's a pain right in your heart. So that leads to the next one, which is compassion. Blessed are the merciful, or the compassionate. And as you said, Clay, that's love in action. That's love moving toward action. And so again, when our heart is broken, we can be compassionate and merciful. We can look around and say, yeah, they're at-risk seniors. I've got a Down syndrome niece. I've got a transgender child who gets hate mail and people telling her to kill herself, right? So that leads to peacemaking. And that's John Lewis, right?
Yeah.
Put yourself in uncomfortable positions. Get yourself into a little good trouble, necessary trouble. And so when you do that, right, unfortunately or fortunately, what we know is Jesus then adds two more beatitudes which have been combined. Blessed are you when you're persecuted or reviled, because you're going to be.
Yeah.
You're going to be, because most people are operating from that reptilian brain. They're operating from fear. And fear is a self-isolating cage. It's a prison. And if you're not in that cage with them, they're going to try to rip your heart out. And they do. But it's okay, because I know who's on my side. So, those attitudes, yeah.
How can I stay out of judgment and be in compassion? That place, because what I find is that in my case, Gard and Clay, is that I will, whatever I am judging out here, there is something that I'm holding in here that is of equal. There's something I'm holding against myself, and it's like an instrument panel. The more you annoy me, there is something I do not want to accept about myself, or I mean, I can still show up and be show up and have boundaries and say, no, this is not okay. But that judgment I lay on someone says more about me than it does about them.
You're absolutely right. Carl Jung said, the beginning of spiritual self-discovery is the withdrawal of our projections. So when you think about what judgment is, it's a projection. And it's a projection of your own woundedness, right? So I grew up in a family where, again, you got a little taste of my father, but my mother was alcoholic. I used to crawl up the outside of the house to get to my room because they would yell at me, right? So again, a contemplative practice is really the sine qua non of this journey. You have to have something which creates a quality of inner resilience, inner awareness, an awareness that I'm not in control, right? That I show up every day, I ask for a new revelation of love, and what do you want me to do today? And I get it. I get the answer. And part of that is the withdrawal. So there's a lovely acronym in Buddhism called RAIN, which is recognize, right? Recognize when you're starting to do just what you're talking about, Dennis, and then accept it. Thomas Gidding used to say, welcome, I'm judging you, Dennis. Gosh, I'm jealous of that bald head of yours. I am so jealous. And so welcome it and recognize that I'm not in control. And okay, let's laugh. And when you do that, you begin to release it. And then inquire where it is in my body. What is it in my heart? Is it my stomach? Is it my head? I have a migraine, right? The body is really a faithful witness to this kind of behavior. And then the last piece is when you do that inquiry, then let it go. right? And this is the serenity prayer, which is so beautiful, which, we recognize we really aren't in control of much.
Oh,
As an
yeah.
amateur paleontologist, I often tell people, human beings, the human species, are really just an Uber service for parasites. They're really in control. Anyway, a little
Yeah.
humor.
Tom Robbins said that human beings were invented by water to get itself from one place to another.
Oh, there you go. There you go. And Genesis, right? God made us in his image, and then we quickly return the favor.
Yeah.
We made God into our image.
I love that. And one of the things that Feynman talked about that I loved, Richard Feynman and Herman Wouk had these wonderful conversations. They talked about how God was too big. Feynman said, God is too big for this stage. You just can't wrap your mind around what this is. So I was thinking about, what if it was an equation in this sense, that God is love, and substituting is for equal, so that if God actually was love,
Right.
and this experience of whatever it is that these great masters and mystics and the Aboriginal, all they're doing is going straight to the source and embodying what that experiences, and all of us have experienced love. I can be a complete agnostic, complete atheist, but I'm experiencing love. I may not, just because I don't have to label it.
Yeah. I often tell my students, they'll come up and, I'll refer to the Tao or Brahman or God or this or that. And I say, I really don't care what the term is. And they'll come up and they'll say, well, Professor, I'm an atheist. And I invariably, I say, tell me about the God you don't believe in, because I probably don't believe in that one either. Right? Because Baylor did the study, right? I don't know if you've seen the Baylor study on the image of God, but 73% of all Christians, right? And it was 5,000 Christians they interviewed. 5% have become atheists as they've done the study, but 73% said God is distant, critical, and autocratic.
Wow.
And who wants to believe in that? I had a father like that. It didn't work out too well, right? I love my dad, and we had a very good relationship at the end, but who wants to believe in a God like that? As you said, Dennis, God is love. Stop, full stop. Right.
That's it.
The question is, have you had the experience of that love? If you haven't, then you need to do something akin to what I did that summer night back in 72. You need to ask with the fullness of your heart. If there's anybody here, I need to know. I need to know now. Yeah. And invariably, my experience with people who ask that question sincerely is they get an answer.
Gard and Clay, when I was in 1974, and I'm driving down. I'm having perhaps one of my worst days. I am so angry, and I'm driving down the road, and I can barely drive, and I start pounding on the dashboard as I'm driving, and I'm screaming at God, calling God every single horrible name I can ever call. I'm taking my fist, beating it up against. I mean, I am having a fit. How I didn't drive off the road, but I didn't. But I'm doing this, and I got it all out after all this hatred, all this vile, all this anger, all this why me. And I felt this incredible love, this absolute, complete love. And that was my moment. That that there was nothing that was going to come back to me but pure love and from that moment and continuing on, I mean, it's been a complete evolution of acceptance.
That's your milestone, and we each have our milestone moments. Yeah. And nobody will ever take that away from you, Dennis. That will be yours forever. And I'm sure, Clay, you've had a similar experience or many experiences like that.
I have. Yeah.
What, as Hafiz says, you've been invited to a divine dance that boils down your choices to just two. You can come dressed for dancing, or you can be carried in by the pallbearers.
Mhm.
Sure, sure. I love how he speaks so much to me. We've all been called into the divine school. Now we can all just stop throwing spitballs for a while. It's just wonder. I mean, this is the wonder of meeting you, Gard, and Clay, whom I've just become so close to. You know, your journey, this journey, this part of maleness, because we're talking about how, because when we were growing up, the three of us growing up at the times that we did, males were driven into a small, you know, like cattle being driven into a pen. You know, this is, you behave within these parameters and you may be a success as a man.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful for your daughter, that your daughter could experience herself the way she is, that I can experience myself with all the weirdness and wildness that is about me, that Clay, you can be this wonderful expression of compassion and walking on this. What a divine rainbow we can experience that we were not in this time that of the 50s and 60s, and that was just so rigid.
Yeah. Well, as I tell my students, all hands on deck, all oars in the water. So keep doing what you're doing, my friends. This is really important work, and people need to hear this message, and they need to know that fear, anxiety, and anger is a swindle. And it's been foisted on you by the politicians, by the business people, by every way you turn. It's been foisted upon you, but it's a swindle. Don't believe it. Don't go there. Sam Harris, who is one of the leading atheists of the planet, you know, who's a neuroscientist, said it's time to wake up. Time to wake up. So we have a huge opportunity, but there's a lot of distance to cover here. And I think that each of us lives through this holy decade and lives to see the end of this holy decade and contributes in some fashion to what I call the unfolding spiritual renaissance of our moment. You know, why wouldn't we want this? Why wouldn't we do this? Thank you.
Thank you, Clay. Thank you, Gard. Thank you, Light of the World, for this opportunity to be able to be in search of the new compassionate male.